What's your process of implementation of innovation or technology?
Well, thankfully, I have a really powerful business technology team. And
how many people are roughly? Like, what's the size of this or composition of the innovation team?
Our innovation team is actually really small. There's just 2 of us.
Okay.
But our business technology team is a little bit over 80 strong. And they're responsible for everything from backend, data storage, data reporting, integrations technology, large scale implementation. We start businesses, we buy businesses, we sell businesses, and those also all require their own kinds of, oftentimes require their own kinds of resource planning softwares, other tools, integrations. And so they really deal with all of that enterprise-wide technology work. So the idea is that, we look at strategy from a high level. So that's kind of the big thing that's missing here from that ground up conversation, is that what the ground up thing doesn't do is it doesn't deliver that pointed corporate strategy, right? Like if you want to change your culture or modify or improve your culture or change the core offering that you're making or change the way that you contract or deliver, you've got to have that really solid strategic reasoning coming from the top.
Okay. Aaron, is there like a typical process you guys follow? Like, I think what we discussed before, we mentioned about like experimentation and pilots. Is there like Swinerton's 5-step process to successful technology purchase or adoption or implementation?
Yeah. I mean, there's really like the 3 stages that we have. We get a lot of support. So if somebody has a clear problem, but it's like a well-defined, known need, let's say it's for a manufacturing control system or it's for a purchase order system or something like that, they can come to the business technology department and ask for help with vendor selection. The business technology team will do that. Potentially they'll pilot that idea, or they'll just go straight to some kind of enterprise implementation. And that's a more traditional project management office. We have a project management office and they run those kinds of well understood things. But generally we ask ourselves, how much don't we know? And if we're able to gather most of the information that we need to understand something, that we can go straight to a pilot, we can go straight into implementation. We can just fill that clear need.
What are the most common things that founders wouldn't disclose, and then you would find out later, if there is any repetitive pattern?
Yeah, that's a pretty good question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that
it works or not.
Yeah, the number one thing is integrations. Right. So as soon as you look at a product and you say, oh, in order to get the efficiency, we need to integrate, you're immediately like dollar signs should start flashing, because you're gonna have to do a lot of work.
How is technology actually used in AEC? In corporate innovations, we explore the innovation and implementation procedures used by those who actually use the tech on a day-to-day basis. Before we get started though, if you're a startup founder or operator responsible for innovation in your company, or you want a deeper, more insightful look into technology in AEC, you won't want to miss our newsletter. From deep dives into particular technologies such as AI, robotics, design, software, and so on. Hot takes from investors betting big in AEC technology, and advice on building tech companies, including the stories and takeaways of the most successful AEC technology founders. Head over to www.bricks-bytes.com and sign up today to get this exclusive material straight to your inbox. And now for the episode.
All right, guys. So, Aaron, thank you for joining us. You are the director of innovation at Swinerton. And I actually wrote down my first question here. Can you tell us what your role is? It looks like I already done that. So anyway, do you want to introduce yourself and perhaps tell us what a day-to-day in the life of Aaron looks like? At Swinerton, of course.
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me, guys. Martin and Owen, I really appreciate it. Yeah, I am the director of innovation at Swinerton. My day-to-day really looks a lot like building relationships and discussing ideas with folks. A lot of it is really thinking about our business, things that could help us, but then finding ways and ideas that will actually be that can actually fit into a change pipeline that people will actually adopt. And so that really involves sorting through a lot of ideas, because the truth is that it's really rare that you find something that just makes sense and that it's going to make sense to the rest of the team. And so we're just, I really talk a lot about the ins and outs of new ideas, ways to think, how things are going. I feel in some ways like a product manager, except I have very few products specifically that we're selling. I'm more like processes and ways of thinking and cultural ideas.
That's a nice way to look at it.
Yeah. So you mean discussing ideas with folks internally about what can be improved, or seeking wisdom perhaps from the outside and broadening the perspective of how other work, or maybe how startups can influence what you guys do?
Yeah, I mean, internally, the culture, the day-to-day operations, the people and the processes are something that our division leaders, our managers, our field operations managers, they're really driving that focus with folks on the ground. But where I come into play is where technologies, new ways of thinking about our business start to interact with them, right? And so it's a very fluid thing. It's a little bit of getting folks on the field to think about new ways to do their core work, the jobs to be done, but then also at a high level thinking about how we charge for that, how we pursue clients, how we build new capabilities. But then the other side of that is very much like, there's a lot of attention in the last few years on the construction industry from startups, from technology. And the truth is that the people that build the best technology are not the people in construction. Now, people with a lot of construction experience are really good at adapting that technology to the business, right? And that's where we see the startup community the startup community is really great at taking their experience in construction or lack thereof and their abilities as product managers to go and find those stories in construction and then adapt that technology. But then there's also that like leading technology idea, which is like, what can technology actually do that maybe even startups aren't doing, or that that we could actually build internally. And so there really is like multiple stages of the external conversation. And then there's also the academic conversations, right? So we want to build that research. So I also work with a couple of different academic institutions on just understanding what the big picture questions are, because just answering a construction question can be a problem. Really what you want to answer is you want to answer a client question. You want to answer a developer question. You don't just want to answer a construction question, because then you're just kind of looking backwards.
Super interesting what you said, that people building good technology are not associated with construction, or maybe are not from construction. So
I think Martin, he said not in construction. So Aaron's point is gone.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. I think the reality of it is that our business, the core business, general contracting, takes a small fee off of a big number.
Hey listeners, I want to take a quick break to remind you about the Bricks and Bytes newsletter. If you're interested in learning about the technology shaping the future of construction, you won't want to miss the valuable insights we share each week. To get this exclusive content delivered straight to your inbox, head over to www.bricks-bytes.com and sign up today. Link is in the show notes. Back to the show.
And that's almost the opposite of most every other business model in, especially product companies where their margins are in the 20 to 30% range, right? And the way they keep that margin elevated is they're investing 5, 10, 15 years out in new technology and intellectual property, right? And that's how they're able to like maintain that pipeline of new products coming in and high margins. But with low margins, you don't have the space to invest in new ideas that aren't going to come to fruition for 5 to 7 years. Plus, when you're investing in future ideas, you also have that portfolio balancing problem where a lot of those ideas are going to fail. And so that's really the core of most construction models, is that we invest a lot in particular projects to build the ideas out because there's money there to pay for that. But there's not, after you get outside of that little core bubble, whether it's a construction manager, like a GMP type contract or a lump sum contract, once you get outside of that bubble, there's no margins left. There's no revenue left. And so you don't get that investment. You don't get the same kind of potential for long-term investment in technology.
Aaron, we were having a chat just beforehand. So Swinerton is an employee-owned company with distributed equity. So how does that feed into the innovation process? Do these the employee owners of the company get a say with perhaps the strategy and what technologies you guys are adopting, or is it a little bit more disconnected than that?
Yeah, I mean, Swinerton's been around for 135 years. And we became 100% employee owned in the mid 80s. But the story along the way has always been a story of continued conglomeration. And even still today, we operate in 16 major main offices around the country, with quite a few other smaller offices. We have division managers, regional managers. Construction itself is fragmented in terms of local regulation, local product type. All of those things make it really difficult to orchestrate a common front, especially from a technology and process point of view across the board. But that has been our goal, to be able to operate in a bunch of those different markets with a common voice and a common process. And that's really where the employee ownership and tying everyone's motivations to a central organization is really valuable. I think tying together all those divisions and all that work that's happening in that independent thinking in all those places would be much more difficult with a single owner or from a public company. So since you have that aligned motivation to succeed as a whole across the board, you get a lot more buy-in from everyone across the board. But when it comes to innovation in those spaces, it's still really hard because you want to encourage incremental innovation, and that happens kind of from the ground up, right? And so let's say you're testing a bunch of stuff in a bunch of different places. You're going to get people that then get committed to do things in that way in all those different places. But most of your efficiencies in a large organization come from common standard operating procedures, right? They come from being able to educate a bunch of people all at one time on one way to do something. And so really it is a constant balance of really digging in and figuring out how much do we experiment? How much do we bring to large scale pilots? How much do we bring to enterprise scale and still be able to keep that efficiency from common operating procedures?
Mm-hmm. Very good. So you mentioned something there that innovation is from the ground up. Is that always the case with you guys? Is it usually as a result of someone's struggling on site, or is it perhaps more tied in at the higher level where you're saying our strategic goals for this year are X, so we need to find technology that does Y?
And are we talking about the ground up innovation in terms of implementation, or where the ideas are coming from?
Yeah, I mean, when I talk about ground up, it's really both. I mean, we have multiple programs that do this because we want to honor the fact that the folks, especially in construction, the folks on the ground are the one that are most aware of the core product that we're delivering to our clients. Right? We're delivering a building, and every part and piece in those buildings is getting put together by somebody who is in a job trailer or has a tool belt on in that building. And so when it comes to, it's so complex that as managers, it's really hard to completely understand every aspect of what's happening. So if you just focus on top-down change, you're going to be really lacking in the details of that change. And you're also going to miss out there's so much in the details about where the efficiencies come from and better ways to deliver that product. So if you're talking about efficiency, if you're talking about insights on the job, you've got to start with the ground. You got to talk to the people. You got to understand how they do their work, what tools they're using. And then they have a lot of great ideas. I mean, some of the most creative people in our company are carpenters. Because they're just out there doing the same thing over and over all the time, and they get bored with that, or they realize that this is like, hey, if I did it this way, if we did it this way together, we would achieve this much faster and more accurately. But also at the end of the day, they're the ones who got to get to do that work. So we can't just tell a carpenter to go do this thing like this. I was in the field for almost 20 years, and you would have people all the time telling you, oh, do this, do that, do this, do that. But at the end of the day, what they really care about is that you get it done on time and you don't waste money. Right. And so there is quite a bit of freedom in the way that we actually execute the work on the job. But getting some alignment about that and some awareness about that is a really powerful tool to wield.
Mm-hmm. What's your process of implementation of innovation or technology?
Well, thankfully, I have a really powerful business technology team. And
how many people, Aaron, roughly? Like, what's the size of this or composition of the innovation team?
Our innovation team is actually really small. There's just 2 of us.
Okay.
But our business technology team is a little bit over 80 strong. And they're responsible for everything from backends, data storage, data reporting, integrations technology, large scale implementation. We start businesses, we buy businesses, we sell businesses, and those also all require their own kinds of, oftentimes require their own kinds of resource planning softwares, other tools, integrations. And so they really deal with all of that enterprise-wide technology work. So the idea is that, we look at strategy from a high level. So that's kind of the big thing that's missing here from that ground up conversation, is that what the ground up thing doesn't do is it doesn't deliver that pointed corporate strategy, right? Like if you want to change your culture or modify or improve your culture or change the core offering that you're making or change the way that you contract or deliver, you've got to have that really solid strategic reasoning coming from the top, because it needs to be sharp and pointed. But then to achieve that in today's world, you need technology to do that. Like, people are really important. People are probably the most important part of this. Obviously, because they're, at least today, they're part of it. Hopefully for Swinerton, it stays that way. But the people and the culture is a huge part of it. But in today's world, to enable new capabilities, you have to pair those people with processes and good technology. And so that's where the strategy, the high level strategy down thing comes from. But in the way that for me and my team, the way that works is really, we have a group of change makers in the organization where they're basically middle managers, and they are getting a lot of word from the folks on the ground in the fields. We have a lot of relationships with those leaders that are directly connected to our folks in the field. And then what we do is we take those ideas and we share them as we're having these strategy conversations. So then we also work specifically right now with our key new businesses on making sure that there's a clear strategy for their business, like not just operational excellence, but how they want to penetrate a market, what their core clients are, what capabilities that they're trying to deliver. And then we work to help them pair those capability gaps with technology. And so that's sort of like how we meet in the middle.
Mm-hmm. How much time does it take to, like, from when you spot the need or someone spots the need and starts asking questions to the implementation of the process?
Yeah, I mean, this is
Maybe you
probably
can give an example or like give an average or best case.
yeah. Well, if it's
Whatever
something
shouts loudest.
if it's something big, like you need a new ERP, a new enterprise resource planning tool, that's going to touch everybody in the organization. That's going to be, 6-8 months of requirements gathering, product selection, implementation, external consultants, a lot of work. So that kind of stuff can take 12 to 18 months. But if you're talking about a tool that is like, targeted to a design process or something like that, modern tech stacks give us the ability really to, deploy stuff in a matter of weeks. But in terms of implementation, but that clock doesn't start running until you sign a contract. And that's probably the most onerous part of our business, is the contract aspect of it. There's a huge gap between construction philosophy about contracting and technology companies' philosophies about.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my goodness. That's a complete culture clash, huh?
That's huge. We operate on this idea of indemnification. It's sort of like, it's like this big chunk of cash sitting out there, and you're working with a bunch of small organizations all the time. So we're working oftentimes with these small subcontractors, and so all of our legal philosophies and principles are built around this idea that, like, they are going to agree that if somebody sues them, that they defend us and that they give us the right to make, make some decisions about settlements and things like that. So there's that indemnification flow that happens always in that one direction. So to keep us from being the target of a frivolous lawsuit, right? But technology companies have all learned from the big tech companies, and all the lawyers are that, so we've got all these small technology companies that are acting like they're the Googles with the big cash to sit on, right? And they're like, no liability, everything's your fault. Yeah.
Yeah, this is very interesting. It's very interesting. So, yeah, because
It's about knowing your customer, right? To some extent too, as a technology company.
yeah, but it is interesting because if thinking this way, this technology will not be providing the results, the outcomes, because there's always going to be a caveat that, by the way, it's not for...
Yeah, if you don't get the outcome, we promise it's not our fault.
Yes, exactly. So it's interesting because when you think about this, is it really good technology if it doesn't provide you with like a customer-like experience?
Well, and I think that gets to the heart of what the questions about implementation. It's less about a process of implementation that always works, but it's more about really being specific to that tool that you're trying to use, because that's where all the magic happens, is the way that you actually get that thing out. So the place where this problem interacts the worst is in robotics.
Explain.
Well,
We're actually discussing robotics today.
Yeah. So traditionally, we've got rental contracts, right? And we go to a big rental company out there, big equipment rental company, And they're like, yes, sir. We absolutely promise to have that lift on site the day you ask for it. We'll turn off the rental as soon as you say you're not using it. We'll even put sensors on it. We'll charge you by the hour that it's actually on site. And if it breaks, we'll promise to have another one on site within 12 hours. Otherwise you get 20% of your money back. And they're like doing everything they can, but they're also working with machines that are quite a bit more durable, sometimes 5 to 10 years of depreciation, compared to robotics, are a lot less expensive, and their development pipeline is already really mature. But we bring a robotics vendor on site, and our team immediately wants the same level of protections from that robotics tool, right? And so it can be a real challenge to engage
Culture
them.
shock.
Yeah, it's a huge culture shock. It's like, no, they're not going to pay you if it doesn't work today. Like, they can't provide guarantees today that all that layout is going to get done in 12 hours, because it's a partnership. It's a combination of us. Maybe once that technology is super developed and you're using it and it's super predictable what the outcomes are going to be. But as long as we're still in the early days of these things, those outcomes are as much dependent on our teams on site that are operating these machines as they are on the machine itself.
That's very interesting. How then do you think that does it become like a battle of the lawyers, solicitors, legal teams, whatever, to try and come to an agreement? Or do you think that startup should just, perhaps a technology provider should just be more cognizant of like the risk that you guys take on as contractors?
Just for context. So first, sorry, go on.
Well, it's just a time problem. Like, I think these things happen. Like, they eventually work themselves out. But they're negotiating positions, and they're tightly held. And it takes a while to get all that. And construction, one of our major competitive advantages and differentiators is actually the way we contract. And all that stuff is kind of secret too, right? So like, the way that it's the thing that protects us from taking on a mega project and failing. And so it's this really like personally held position. And there's not a public database of how contractors should protect themselves. It's based on your personal experience. So it's really just time. It just takes time.
Okay. Aaron, is there like a typical process you guys follow? Like, I think when we discussed before, you mentioned about like experimentation and pilots. Is there like Swinerton's 5-step process to successful technology purchase or adoption or implementation?
Yeah. I mean, there's really like the 3 stages that we have. We get a lot of support. So if somebody has a clear problem, but it's like a well-defined, known need, let's say it's for a manufacturing control system, or it's for a purchase order system or something like that, they can come to the business technology department and ask for help with vendor selection. The business technology team will do that. Potentially they'll pilot that idea, or they'll just go straight to some kind of enterprise implementation. And that's a more traditional project management office. We have a project management office, and they run those kinds of well understood things. But generally we ask ourselves, how much don't we know? And if we're able to gather most of the information that we need to understand something, that we can go straight to a pilot, we can go straight into implementation. We can just fill that clear need. But when it's something that is, that offers potentially a way to change the process or do something in a new way, we have decided that just going to a pilot, which, these things could be construed differently, but that pilots sometimes are still too formal and expensive. And so we've started doing stuff that's even earlier than that, which is more experimental things. Like when there's a high level of things that we don't know about something, we still want to attach a business objective to it and say, what are we trying to achieve with this? So that we're not just like playing with toys. But then we can collect and learn about stuff that's even newer, stuff that is has even more unknowns, and try to find ways to use that and opportunities to bring it to a larger audience.
Can you, so sorry, Martin, just one thing, just on the experiments. So experiments are more like, I guess, shopping to some extent, whereas pilots are like, okay, we think we found what we want, but we now want to test it for perhaps a fee paid to the provider before it goes into like full scale deployment.
Yeah, and we'll pay fees even at experimentation stages. But it's like shopping, except that the idea that you're going to wear those clothes for a couple of days and see if the seams start to tear out, and do that before you decide to buy those same pants for the whole team or whatever. It's in some ways it's a very conservative approach to bringing technology in. It allows us to like get to know a team, get to know their contracts early before we're in a place where we really have to deploy something. So it allows us to develop relationships with technology providers a lot earlier. Even in the pre-seed stage of startup development, we can bring things on as experiments where, everybody knows this is a temporary relationship. We don't necessarily have to get to a full MSA. We can operate on a smaller, less, with fewer, like a less consequential contract for both parties, and allows us to dig in and see how that works.
You said that pilots are quite formal and expensive. Can you elaborate a little bit on the expensive part, and what would be ideal way of engagement with new technology from a contractor's point of view? Because saying that they're expensive is a statement. Yeah, so just curious, like from the contractor's point of view, like what would be the best way to engage with technology providers?
Yeah, I mean, the best way would be just absolute information about a product, right? And that's, I guess that's what Adam Smith tells us is like one of the most important things about a market working properly. But absolute information is really hard to come by when it comes to software, and what tools can do. I don't know if you guys have looked at many of the web pages out there for a lot of product, but it's really difficult to tell what something even does.
So most of the website of startups I go through, I don't know what they do, and it's just impossible to figure it out, really, unless you know people who are building it.
So you want to get it in your hands, right? But once you got it in your hands and you kind of know what it does, and it seems like there's some value in it, the challenge is that there is a lot of people that have to engage in it, and again with construction, because of the structure of our business model being mostly fee-based, being mostly project-based. When you pull someone out of that, there's an opportunity cost for that. Or you have somebody who has time. It's almost like you have to have all this billable time that's going to that pilot, right? And that adds up pretty quick. You can burn through 10K and 50, 60 hours sometimes when it comes, between materials and labor costs or salary overhead. And so, if I've got a software and the license is, $10,000 on this project for 6 months, but I need 2 or 3 people in there holding hands to figure out how to do it right and to solve that problem. My actual costs to do that could be $50,000-$60,000. And so just understanding, sometimes figuring out what a piece of software can actually do can be really expensive. Because we can't just get a client to pay for this stuff all the time. We can't just deploy a product that doesn't actually work on a project, because the consequences can be really high.
Yeah, just so you're talking about like brutal transparency about the product and functionality. What are the most common things that founders wouldn't disclose, and then you would find out later, if there is any repetitive pattern?
Yeah, that's a pretty good question.
Yeah, I mean, I think
it works or not.
The number one thing is the integrations. Right. So as soon as you look at a product and you say, oh, in order to get the efficiency, we need to integrate, you're immediately like dollar signs should start flashing. Because you're gonna have to do a lot of work.
And is it a way to streamline it somehow, like a package it in a way that, okay, if someone wants integrations, then, here is our integration. I'm probably oversimplifying it.
Well, and that's another startup effort, right? So like there's a bunch of folks that have come in that are like, oh, we've got instant integrations to ACC, we've got instant Procore integrations, we do all that stuff. Where you end up with problems is then when you're trying to get that into your financial system or something like that. So a lot of these tools, it depends on what data and information that they're holding. If it really is like enterprise level information about contracts or costs, invoicing, things like that, then there's a lot of cybersecurity concerns that most startups are answering. But then there's also a lot of kind of fundamental gaps in our core, in most of these enterprise softwares. Their APIs were built years ago. They were built more for like SDKs and local machine deployment and not for cloud deployment. And so sometimes their APIs are kind of backwards and upside down in terms of their authentication paths and stuff like that. So it really, now all of a sudden we're in the situation where we have to heavily scrutinize like all the cybersecurity aspects of it or the data privacy aspects of these integrations. And it can get pretty challenging even if it is an easy button. Because the easier the button is, the higher likelihood that it's got a lot of vulnerabilities.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay, Aaron, could you maybe tell us about some of the technologies that are within your toolbox? Excuse the pun, for our construction podcast.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the stuff that we've seen that's working really well. I really like the idea of on-site robotics. But it's such an expensive, like hard tech is expensive to build. And there's not, the most successful places where that's really happening, I think, is in the solar industry. Where we're seeing, and there's just a clear need in that space of, you're working at remote jobs. It's hard to deploy skilled workforce in those cases. You got, you need people to travel, all that stuff. So some of the robotics in terms of pile driving and even now they're getting into some cool stuff with setting panels and stuff. I think is a unique place just because that work has such, sort of extreme requirements. In our part of the business and an urban space and these urban places, really like, autonomous drone flights are really, really helpful. They give us more up-to-date information. I really do like the robotic layout tools. Most importantly, the printers. The printers are really valuable from an accuracy point of view. They really help to eliminate this cumulative error problem. They get us back to an absolute location problem, and that continues time and time again to deliver a lot of returns on quality. We get walls in the right place, we get formwork in the right place, we get all that stuff. And if there's a problem, we figure it out early, and that's really nice. And then also they really help to communicate a lot. because it's not just a single trade. Most of the time, it's you're communicating layout to multiple trades when you have that opportunity. So that stuff is really cool. I'm still and we still have a little ways to go on like full adoption in terms of the robotic layout, but most of that isn't because it's not expected. It's because of the scale of a lot of our projects. Getting high levels of coordination, doing pre-coordination on jobs isn't always possible or economically viable on smaller projects.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as we get to a larger project and we have a full suite of BIM, VDC coordination happening, these tools are just like a no-brainer. The layout tools are a no-brainer. On a smaller project where you're a little bit less certain about the dimensional accuracy of the drawings, you have to be a little bit more careful. And then also just the cost and scale of deploying robots on small projects can be more expensive than just getting out there and getting a good survey and snapping lines, if you've only got 10 or 20. But in those cases, if you got something that is like a complicated curve, or you got complicated soffits or irregular lighting layouts, things like that, those tools are just like, it's so much better than having a carpenter sitting there doing compass math for days to try to figure out where all that stuff belongs.
Mm-hmm.
But I think increasingly I'm seeing a lot of really cool stuff around computer vision, but then also the way that that's interacting with laser scheme.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Mm-hmm. This idea of sort of being able to go back and forth interchangeably between a laser scan and an object is a really cool space for us to be at in terms of capturing quality, in terms of capturing the work in place that's happening, in terms of potentially even bringing in virtual reality or augmented reality tools, because all of those things are dependent on like accurate absolute locations. And so the tools really at the heart of all that are really, I think, these tools like RTK, our ability to take GNSS and reconcile it to increasingly accurate locations, at least in the XY direction. Like there's still some challenges in from a vertical point of view, but the XY location stuff, that's really like, the way you get to like a robotic, operation without a crazy high level of autonomy is you have a really good location, a really good geolocation scenario happen.
Mm-hmm. Just reflecting on the guarantees that we talked about earlier, that startups will provide guarantees that things will be done correctly or like with accuracy. Just Googling like when the first excavator was developed or built, it was in 1996, right? So 230 years ago of a journey of an excavator, and it still most of the time doesn't operate itself. So I think we are quite well advanced right now where we are, and I'm pretty sure in the next few years these things will be like super more automated, more accurate.
Yeah,
cool.
That's very cool stuff. Yeah. And the automation around that is really being driven, like I said before. I mean, like we talked earlier, there's not a lot new in construction. It's almost all coming from consumer product or some other more investment driven space. And so obviously autonomous vehicles are driving a lot of the sensor technology, the computer vision technology for that. As soon as they start to run into trouble deploying that across multiple cities, they're going to come to construction sites and do that kind of work in construction. And I think the excavators are a key place where that's valuable for sure right now.
Mm-hmm. Aaron, how do you deal with what's your criteria typically for filtering and assessing best technologies? Like, how do you know that technology is like not just okay versus one that is like superior and best in class?
Yeah, I think paying attention to, we have some technology benchmarking tools that we use. It's become increasingly important to understand that.
Are these commercial tools or like developed internally?
More like consultant to develop tools. You know, companies like Gartner that really are benchmarking tools that are being used, industry agnostic tools, right? All these, and so a lot of times we can really look to those spaces first and say, hey, there's this really expensive tool that the US government is using that is like really good at this thing, and we can use that as a benchmark. But the reality is, for us to deploy that tool is probably cost prohibitive for us. So you start to look at other tools that are doing something similar, but maybe not, maybe don't have the same coverage. And so that's one way, is just by benchmarking and seeing where who's using tools. A lot of times in construction, we're like really excited about seeing what the other construction companies are using.
Yeah.
So we like to let other people fail first. But
I love that. Well, that's how it is. It should be an
competition, huh?
Yes.
Yeah. But you've also got to be a leader sometimes too in the space, right? And so we look at how that works, but it's a lot of this has to do with trying to future proof and thinking about where the rest of the world is going, right? We know that cloud computing is here to stay. We know that data orchestration layers are really important. We know that user permissions and user level security is really important. We know that portability and sort of transparency are important. So there's really companies and tools out there that are continuing to develop their products to get better and better and better. And they have teams that are devoted to that. And that's generally the sign of a good piece of technology, right? If an organization is like 90% salespeople and 10% engineers, you're probably in trouble with their software. Because, they're not going to be, they're going to be slow to fix bugs. Their support is going to be like basically to make sure you keep buying and not to make sure it's actually operating really well. So it's those kinds of things that we look at, is like, how big is the sales organization? Sometimes you get that like super slick, happy sales conversation and you go, oh, I wonder what the product actually is like, and so that's, there's a number of things, but I mean, I think at the core, it's like multi-tiered technology, like multi-tier software. Like you need, you need data storage, you need, you need cloud data storage. You want them to be in multiple places. You want recoverability, and then you want accessibility. So like most software tools today should be able to be deployed from a browser. And unless it has a very specific purpose, like it requires a large number of GPUs or something like that to run an image generation or something like that. But if it's not, that basically means that it's really operating on a stack that is like gonna need refactoring at some point, and it's gonna have a hard time working with playing well with others.
Question, like a quick one maybe. Do you think that software tool needs an employee of the startup to be sent to the, let's say, headquarter of incumbent or construction company or design company to help them implement the tool, or that's completely unnecessary and that's probably a sign of bad technology?
Yeah, that's a service business, Martin.
Yeah, the service.
Well, that's a feedback I got during the Boost conference, that from innovation managers, that there's a lot of startups which sell in a way that they would send few folks to a company headquarters to sell to them and to make them like them, or like each other, so that they were tied down with this relationship, and all in a kind of the real motive is to basically to become friends rather than...
Yeah, but you know what? I think that helps, right? You gotta like the...
Yes, but that's
selling
not a
you
good
the
technology if you have to, like, become, if you need to sell people.
Okay. Put it this way: if you have
Aaron just said, you need to deploy it from the browser, right? That says a lot, right? If you need to send 2 people, fly them for 2 weeks to deploy a product or a service, it's just...
But what I would say is, if you had a really great product, but you really hated this person that was selling it to you, do you think you would buy it?
I mean, if you, so that means that you're not acting on behalf of your corporation, right? Well, because if the product would help you, but you don't like someone who sells it, that's kind of a people problem, not you're missing the objective in this kind of issue, I think. Yeah, when you consider it this way. Back to you, Aaron. Sorry.
No, I love it. This is like this, and this is actually what we do at our construction company all the time. Is we get an idea out there, right? And we like really have to, like, this is a lot of what innovation is. It's like, well, what if? And the truth is that there's different kinds of deployment, right? So if you're talking about something that's new and difficult to understand the basic processes of it, it can be really important to have somebody there implementing it. But also, like one of the most successful technology companies in construction was PlanGrid, right? PlanGrid rested their marketing effort on going out and doing lunch and learns, going in and meeting people and doing things, because their real problem wasn't the software. It was getting people to use a software. So it really depends on what problem that you're trying to solve in the business. If it's already like a clear workflow and everybody's like, we want to do it this way, and they can dig in, and the user experience is such that they can achieve what they're trying to achieve by just following the prompts and the journey in the product, then that's great. But if you're actually trying to like alter the behavior of the industry, then that requires like relationships. And so that, and that alteration of the behavior can also be really difficult, though, to quantify the value of it too, right? So there's, and so that's where the relationships come into play. If you can just show somebody, oh, if you swap this, accounting software for this accounting software, it'll cost you this much to swap it, and you'll save 30% on your employees' benefit. Like there's this direct relationship. But at that point, you're telling, okay, if you stop printing all of your paper drawings out here and you do this thing that nobody else is doing yet, then you're gonna save a bunch of money probably, but you're gonna really like your job better. You need to sell that with relationships.
No, that's fair. Yeah. It's not that straightforward or black or white. Yeah, depends.
But I will say that it is also one of the biggest problems with the existing tech stacks is that they do require so much explanation. Like if it's a relatively simple process and you have to memorize the picks and clicks to get somewhere, then you've got a bad UI.
Yes. This is where the key piece is to go over something Jivan from OpenSpace, CEO of OpenSpace, said. One of the things that sticks with me is about building great products, make it simple to buy and simple to use. Simplicity. Off you go. So mine, you don't have to debate about whether you like the salesperson or not.
I would never debate that.
But we're early with AI and agents too, right? And I think right now, if you're selling an AI agent product, you need relationships. Because this is another example of where we're changing people's behaviors and not giving them a new tool to do it, right? In that case, people are so dependent on trust and sort of understanding, and you have to help people shift their understanding to the point where I think for a while, some of these really powerful tools are probably going to be deployed from a product point, like from an outcomes point of view. If you're really trying to deliver something like cutting edge with AI agents or high levels of automation that are being grounded in AI, a lot of folks don't even want to take the risk of bringing it on as a software tool. They want you to deliver the end product.
Mm.
And so I think we're going to be in that space for a little while. And it might be the smartest place for a team to be, because a lot of these AI approaches do take a lot of time. They take a lot of personal attention, and they can be difficult to develop a deployable package, right? It's difficult to say, okay, well, if you want to solve this problem, you need to combine this knowledge graph with this kind of RAG output with this kind of prompt, right? It can be really difficult to programmatically present that to solve a specific problem. And you might just want to do that as a consulting effort. It makes it a lot less investable from a VC point of view. But it potentially gives you like also immediate revenues to continue to work on improving and productizing your tool.
Agreed.
You gotta
Yeah, I like that viewpoint actually, because you also have the trust issue, like with the output of the AI as well, right? People like we're making big stakes decisions in construction, and you're just relying on. I mean, the science will perhaps tell you that the output from the AI is probably more accurate, or as accurate, probably more accurate than a human. However, the trust factor is still not there.
And at least if you have a consultancy service, you can get someone to the court if you have to.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Well, and that's exactly right. We can structure that contract in that way. Like, right, we can structure a service contract to basically make somebody responsible from a professional services point of view versus like just a software output point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. Aaron, can you give us some? I don't know if you're able to do this, but some of the tools that you actually use, like names of the companies, or is that against your policy to do that?
Well, I can talk about a couple of tools a couple of folks that we've had like early stage relationships with, that are public with their products. And I think those are good examples of like how a company can really work well together. We don't have any direct investments in any startups. A lot of that has to do with sort of the capital structure that we talked about earlier. It has to do with that shorter term risk profile that we have as an employee-owned company. You know, our risk profile looks a lot more like a pension fund risk profile, because 100% of our employee ownership is in these like stocks, which really represent a retirement account to a lot of us, right? So, so that like direct investment still isn't part of that our appetite yet, but those relationships and that work and that access and that process building is. And so there's one company that we've worked with called Remy. Remy does submittal intelligence. We started working with them really early, and they immediately started developing relationships with some of our teams. I think we probably could have just deployed their product, but they also wanted a lot of feedback. They also wanted to understand, they had experience in the construction business, but they also wanted to understand what was happening today on the ground with our teams and the way that, and just really understand all of the exceptions that were out there. They could engineer to the expectations, but there's a lot of exceptions, a lot of things that would happen. And so obviously not just working with us, working with multiple other companies at the same time, help them to get, a less biased opinion on product development, but also really helps them to, develop a tool that really works for people. But basically that tool, you take your specifications and you take your submittals, primarily works on product submittals. And it just gives that project engineer a really clear understanding of whether or not this product and the submittal actually fits the specifications on the project without having to dig through indexes over and over, and without having to read through a bunch of irrelevant information, but highlighting the relevant information. And then they can dig into that side by side and say, okay, this stuff maybe matches. Okay, let's figure out why it maybe matches. And then they can, really dig in on that part of the process. So giving them that user interface where they can sort of match up different parts of these documents without having to search through them, without having to, do all the work of finding the relevant information, but then just reviewing the relevant information. It's a huge thing, especially for project engineers, because then they're able to actually dig into the meat of the problem much faster. So they're learning more about the project, or learning more about the product because they're reading the relevant information first. Instead of figuring out how to be really how to work the card catalog at the I sort of think about that part of it almost as the difference. I don't know if you guys ever went to a library that had a card catalog. But the Dewey Decimal System is this crazy thing, right? We used to go to libraries and you literally had to decide what type of literature you were looking for, then decide if you were going to search by author or by the title. And then you have to go to a different box to do that with, right? And it's a box full of paper and it says where the thing is on the shelves, right? So you spend half your time at the library just searching through this box full of paper for where the thing is, right? So that was really early search. The thing that this is doing for us today is it's rapidly accelerating that search where it's multiple documents, multiple pieces of information in multiple places. Here it is right now. You decide finally if this is the thing. And so that's actually going to continue to be valuable for a bunch of other parts of our business. But the submittal portion has been really, really cool. And it's been really, really great to work closely with that team as they're bringing in tech and new ideas, and that space is rapidly changing. And then the other side of that is really, we've been working with a company called Roger. Roger initially was really building something that is logs. We looked at a lot of our project management processes and said, what are we doing in Excel right now? And everybody was in Excel doing with logs, submittal logs, procurement logs, all these things. And it was why don't we get those things into a simple place? So not all that much different than Monday.com or Smartsheet, except that they're built for purpose. They're built for construction logs. So they have the whole, they have the core features that you need. Not really a revolutionary product, except from a user experience point of view. For construction, it's it does exactly what our construction teams need. Not anything more, not anything less. It's it just does exactly what they need.
Mm-hmm.
But then that team obviously built this tool out. It doesn't require a whole bunch of additional maintenance, and it turned into this thing where they really started to focus on taking that log idea and solving some other problems in construction. And now they're working on scopes. So they're working on scope definition. And Josh is really having at Roger. Josh is having some really valuable conversations with the industry through places like LinkedIn and other places about what it means to write contract scopes. Traditionally, we've tried to be as specific as we can while still being really vague about it, so that a subcontractor really knows that they've got to deliver all the plumbing and doesn't start to get into a place where they're splitting hairs, but where we're specific enough with them that they know what questions to ask, right? So they still have to be able to ask those RFI questions. They still have to understand the level of detail that's available so that they can price what the plumbing is, but we want them to do the plumbing, right? When you start to get really specific and you say you're responsible for all these things, it's possible that in a set of plans or in a scenario that some plumbing didn't get drawn, but was implied that it was needed, right? You still need them to pick that up. And so Josh's approach with scopes has really been to look for, instead of saying just quantify what's here, look at what's here and what should be here. And trying to get the idea to reason through the AI to reason through the way that something should be built in order to develop a really good set of scopes that can be really specific, but cover the breadth of the concept. And so that's some really cool work that he's doing with AI, and it's really like so prompt and context based that he's delivering most of that again through a service-based model.
That's super interesting.
Aaron, and the last question from me would be about collaboration and competition, which is basically, do you work is too much said, but do you talk to other innovation managers from other contractors? Is there an exchange of thoughts or information between general contractors, or it doesn't exist?
Yes, it very much exists, especially in the technology space. We again, we don't have the resources to do this all on our own. And for the most part, if you get together with a few other companies that are all moving in a similar direction, you can it's a really big market. The construction market is really big, and most of our specialties are going to have more to do with the history of certain product types and less to do with, at least today, less to do with the specific technologies. And then when it comes to those things, it really has to do with how we implement and how we deploy this stuff, that we get the most value out of it and we give the most value to a client out of it. So the presence of the technology, the value of the technology itself isn't really where the differentiation comes. The differentiation comes from our culture and the way that we deploy that technology. Right? Like, just because that tool is installed on your desktop doesn't mean that you're actually using it to its full value. And so that's really where the value to the client comes from. For us, is the diligence, the drive to achieve those efficiencies, the drive to achieve that value delivery. And so it's much easier for the rest of us to sit back and say, hey, let's actually share ideas. Let's develop this stuff together. The startup community is small enough in construction too, that there needs to be some collaboration so that at least some of the good ideas achieve and mature. That's the other side of it, is there's no way for these small startups to come up with a great idea and scale without us finding some level of consensus around what's really needed and how to encourage that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think that's a good place to leave it. Aaron, could you, I mean, we usually ask people where they can find out more about you, but maybe we could tell us, are there any specific technologies that you're looking for right now that you're struggling to find a solution for?
What I'm exploring right now is how we can take this idea of data orchestration and automation and make it easy to adopt in construction. So there's plenty of technologies out there for this, but I think the reality is that we've got a bunch of opportunities with computer vision. We've got a bunch of opportunities with large language models. We've got a bunch of opportunities with robotics and these different tools. The biggest challenge is being able to bring it together into a cohesive space, into a workflow, and actually deliver all that information and have it interact well with each other. Because there are so many issues with privacy rights, with confidentiality on projects, with the actual definitions of these data and the way that the data interacts. And so really what, where I'm looking to right now and exploring are these tools that are able to orchestrate data across multiple environments and be able to bring workflows together and accomplish things in those different spaces. Right. And that's where AI is going to sort of be the new face of software, I think, is data tables and information on the back and passive data collection systems and AI tools on the front end that we can really interact with in a human way, through language and other kinds of expectations, and they can orchestrate that work on the back end.
Very good.
Okay.
Okay, Aaron, thank you so much.
Thank you.